What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, October 30th, 2018, next to the last day of the month. Tomorrow, of course, being Halloween. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Before we get into it, though, a little bit of a caveat. Right now, we are under very heavy rain. The lower parts of the island are under a flash flood warning, which means flooding is happening, and there are intermittent thunderstorms. So hopefully we'll get through the show without an interruption, but we've had these problems in the past when the weather is really bad that we'll lose our power or our internet. So just stick with us, and we'll try and get through the whole program uninterrupted here. One of these days, when I win the lottery, I'm going to have my own generators and satellite dish, and we won't have to deal with this stuff anymore. All right, so let's get into it. Obviously, the midterm elections are now just 1 week away, and there's a lot of battling going on back and forth. It's getting a lot of news coverage. In fact, it's so much that it's actually driving other stories like the synagogue shooting off the feed here. So, in fact, right now Fox News is covering the Florida gubernatorial candidate, Ron DeSantis. So, James Consular came on out saying that these midterms are going to be pivotal. They could actually mark a shift from a total culture war to all-out civil war. And he's responding, of course, to the growing violence that we are seeing just all over our country, whether it was the synagogue, Mandalay Bay, the phony bomb prop mailings, and it just seems like the entire country is primed to explode into rage. And yes, we're under a great deal of pressure as a population, mostly economic. A lot of the violence, of course, is being encouraged by people like Maxine Waters and Eric Holder, and Loretta Lynch even came on out and said, yes, get in their face. Could also be that so many people are on these prescription antidepressants, which do tend to trigger violence. And by the way, it's actually now in the product warnings on those little tiny fonts that they use to print those things. Over in New Jersey, apparently Republican Bob Huggin is going down into the dirt against incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. He is bringing up that underage prostitution allegations against Menendez. Now, Menendez never faced any prosecution for that because this all supposedly happened in another country outside the U.S. jurisdiction. But it's still kind of a tacky situation. But that's out there. Now, the other day we were talking about how in the early voting in 25 states, Republicans were turning out a lot more than Democrats, and it turns out that's also happening with the mail-in ballots. Far more are coming in from Republicans than Democrats. It's starting to look like the Democratic voters just got disgusted and quit. Apparently, there's the walkaway movement. People are leaving the Democratic Party. There's what's called the Blexit, where apparently the black population, which are traditional Democratic supporters, they're kind of moving away from that. I guess one too many promises not kept here. So again, the wild cards are the election fraud, which is massive, and both sides are already accusing each other of engaging in it, and of course the illegal immigrant vote. Okay, apparently down in Florida, in South Daytona, the Volusia County Republican headquarters were shot up over the weekend. At least 5 gunshots fired in, broke the windows out front. The media says, oh, it's vandalism. It's vandalism. It's got nothing to do with the Democrats or violence or anything like that. It's just vandalism here. All right, we have a caller on the line, Layla in Ontario. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Actually, I'm responding to something that you said yesterday, that you believe the human species evolved in various areas around the planet and didn't come just out of Africa.
Yes.
I absolutely agree with you, and I'm stunned that people still buy into that simplistic and childish notion. I mean, it takes hundreds of millions of years for the adaptations to occur, and furthermore, all the elements necessary for life to arise spontaneously have been available all around the planet for millennia, if not millions of years.
Billions of years.
So clearly, billions of years, exactly. The planet, I mean, in fact, civilizations have risen and died. And the species, the various species, we are actually a series of subspecies.
Yes.
The woman who called in yesterday about the Neanderthals, anatomically modern humans have between 1 to 4% of Neanderthal genome within them.
Yes.
And it may be even more. They just haven't uncovered the entire genome. But there are numerous others, also the Denisovans. So we're far more varied than people have been told and are too willing to accept. And on the subject of being too willing to accept simplistic explanations, do you remember the case of Alain Kurdi, that young boy who washed up on the shore of the Bodrum Beach in Turkey?
Yeah, I remember that. But before we get on to that, I want to step back a little bit. The reason people have that simplistic approach of being a single origin for the human race, that comes out of the Bible. It's religion. It's not necessarily science. It's like the Big Bang Theory. Even though there is so much empirical evidence against that, people have been raised to want to believe that there's a supreme creator of the universe who sneezed the universe into existence at some point in the recent past here. And so there's a lot really of contamination coming out of religion in our supposed scientific technical society. And that's why people go for these overly simplistic explanations. Anyway, getting on back to this young boy who washed up in Turkey, who, by the way, was moved because where he originally washed out wasn't really photographically good. They literally moved the body and posed it to get the photo that went viral.
Bravo, Mike. You're one of the few who actually saw that. When I raised the subject, everyone thought I was just being mean. The boy actually, anyone who has ever seen a child with a wet diaper knows that it hangs around his knees. We have a child here. First of all, a person who washes up on shore, they're usually head first or sideways if they're heavy enough. The heaviest object always leads. And furthermore, his arms were not bent in the normal way when people drown.
Yes.
And his shoes were on. His clothes were not amiss. His hair was not a mess. So the whole thing was clearly staged. Furthermore, his name is Alain Kurdi, which means he's Kurdish. He was probably, he was a human sacrifice. He was given away. The father apparently was denied entry to Canada, and he wanted to get his teeth done. His sister lived in Vancouver. She tried to sponsor them. He was denied entry to Canada. My guess is that they paid the father to actually give his child as a symbol. And he was used actually by, ironically, Amnesty International, because I remember trying to contact the photographer who took the photo, and I said to him, and I challenged him on whether it was staged. Obviously, he never answered. But the other thing, that all the bodies that were lined up along the beach, did you notice how many of them had their flip-flops on?
Yes.
Now, who drowns and their flip-flops are still on?
Very few people. In fact, people who are perfectly healthy lose those flip-flops. Here in Hawaii, I mean, you drive down the highway, you're going to see them, off on the side of the road because people are just lounging in the back of a truck and they've got their feet up in the air and the flip-flops just come on off. Unless you've got the ones that strap on like the Tevos, they're almost considered a disposable item. Now, getting on back to the young boy, my understanding was that he was not actually a refugee, but the son of the captain of the ship that had been taking those people across. But there's a lot of fakery out there to push this agenda of feel bad for the refugees, open your hearts, open your homes, open your wallets, and let them in. But I think it's really beginning to wear out. Certainly, we're seeing that across Europe and here in the United States of America, because it has not brought about this wonderful utopian globalist society that we were all told was going to happen if we got rid of the borders. What we got was a lot of trouble, and an illustration of why borders are necessary.
Yes, exactly. And by the way, on the issue again of religion and the Big Bang Theory, you know, I'm sure you're aware, but most people probably don't realize that it was actually a priest that came up with the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, it was George Lemaitre. When Hubble discovered the redshift, he did not make any conclusions about what it meant. He simply observed the farther an object away is, the more its spectrum is redshifted. And it was this Catholic priest who was also an astronomer, Georges Lemaitre, and apparently was very good friends with Einstein. And he said, yeah, it's relative motion. It's got to be. And that means if we wind it back through time, we have a moment of supreme creation. Huzzah, huzzah. And, you know, anything that supports the church is heavily promoted. But when Einstein did come up with general relativity, the Big Bang Theory should have been thrown out because the two are absolutely incompatible. But they still cling to that. They still cling to it.
On the subject of Einstein, do you know that his first wife was he actually plagiarized a lot of her work?
Yes.
And abandoned her with their schizophrenic child. Her name was Milena Maric. And ironically, she was born not too far away from where Nikola Tesla was born during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So I have to wonder about some genetics that may have had high intellectual capacity within that region. But he abandoned her. He plagiarized her work and two other colleagues in 1905. Yep. He also worked in the patent office, so we have to wonder how much he stole from there, because the question is, what did he do after his the theory of relativity? After he and Milena Maric, after he abandoned her and married his first cousin, against whom, by the way, he was unfaithful. But I mean, the whole thing is a stink. Every time I see this praise of Einstein, I'm utterly nauseated. But
well, okay, Leila, I need to cut in here. I need to cut in here because, you know, we're here to talk about current events. There was recently a mini-series on the life of Einstein that really did cover a lot of this ground. And again, history is a joke played by whoever won the argument or the battle. Anyway, Leila, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go and get back to the news after a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So getting on back to election fraud, Tim Pool is reporting that Democrats have been caught trying to register non-citizens now in many states. Associated Press was reporting that Democrats were sending out voter registration forms to non-citizens. Now, fortunately, many of these non-citizens were confused by this, and they called the voting commission asking if they were allowed to vote. And of course, they were told, no, you're not. And this has been happening in Texas and California, where non-citizens are being registered to vote by the Democrats here. Now, Republicans are saying voter fraud is a huge issue. Democrats are saying, no, it isn't. What do you voter fraud here? There's no voter fraud here. You know, and even if there was, it wouldn't change the outcome. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. But there is a lot of evidence that there is a serious problem with our election system, and it is a joke. And I'm very upset that Donald Trump came into the Oval Office, vowing to fix the system. And he set up this Election Integrity Commission, which was trying to get the cooperation of the state election commissions and hitting a lot of brick walls. And at that point, Trump should have put on those presidential brass knuckles and told those state commissions, you will get no more federal funding until you start cooperating with the Election Integrity Commission. But instead, Trump shut the commission down, gave it all to the Department of Homeland Security, who, as far as I can tell, has done absolutely nothing other than to try and look at the electronic voting machines and make sure they can't be hacked. And that's about it. Okay, apparently we're having some technical difficulties, and we're not going to be able to take calls for a while. So probably in the next hour, the phone systems will be working again. And this gets, of course, back to John Stadtmiller's solicitation for donations. Republic Broadcasting needs new equipment. This stuff does wear out, and this is the result. We're not able to take calls. So let's get some news in here. Interesting little article that came on out of Journal Neo talking about Nikki Haley, where she basically resigned as United States ambassador to the UN at the peak of her fame, if you will, if not popularity. And CNN is saying Haley is jumping ship just in the nick of time. Now, here is the situation. There are rumors starting to float around that she is considering a run for the White House in 2020, which, of course, would make her an instant enemy of Hillary Clinton. Okay, you remember the witness against Kavanaugh, Ford? And everybody said she has nothing to gain by coming forward. Believe the woman. Believe the woman. She's got nothing to gain. Well, that's not exactly true, because she had a crowdfunding site, and it looks like she's going to take home at least $1 million, and it looks like she's going to get a book deal as well. Now, interestingly enough, in the world of the women must always be believed, there is a report coming on out from the Gateway Pundit that a woman has come forward accusing former FBI Director Robert Mueller of rape, and it happened back in 2010. The woman is apparently a professional, and there is corroboration. And of course, Mueller's defenders are already out there trashing the accuser. Oh my goodness, she's a slut. They don't even know who she is yet. And she's a slut, she's an opportunist. And Mueller himself was on TV, and he made an interesting quote saying, "These women are being paid to smear me." Now, in the original Gateway Pundit report, it was only one accuser. So Mueller just kind of blew the cover off the fact that there may be more than one accuser. So Mueller is now going to feel what Kavanaugh had to go through. And it's amazing to see all these liberals who are out there saying, oh, always believe the women, always believe the women. And now it's Robert Mueller. Oh, no. We demand proof. We demand absolute proof. Okay, today they started the funerals for the victims of the synagogue shooting, and I don't want to hear anybody out there saying, show me the bodies, because it's a pointless distraction. And Donald Trump is down there in Pittsburgh. And there's an interesting little article. They're trying to make a big deal out of the fact that even though this shooter was out there saying all Jews must die, that when he was taken to the hospital to be treated for his injuries, that he was treated by Jewish doctors. So this article was literally Fox News. And this is a direct quote from the Fox News articles. Another nurse whose father is a rabbi came in from a mass casualty drill and took care of this gentleman. So we now know there was a mass casualty drill taking place at the same time as the shooting, which is a pattern we have seen many times before. Now, Mike Pence, well-intentioned, wanted to offer a prayer for the victims, and he basically asked a messianic rabbi to give, the prayer. Well, for those of you who don't understand, there is a section of Jews who do believe Jesus was the rabbi. And so this messianic rabbi invoked Jesus the Messiah in his speech, and it just backfired on Mike Pence. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we get back to the news here, I just got a great email. And it says, so humans are between 4% and 1% Neanderthal. Heck, that makes me more Neanderthal than Elizabeth Warren is Native American. We have some very bright people who listen to this show. Okay, getting on back to more serious things. We're talking about Trump is in Pittsburgh. He's paying his respects. And yesterday we had this report on how these Jewish leaders said that Trump was unwelcome in Pittsburgh unless he was willing to condemn white nationalism. They're trying to link white and nationalism in order to demonize it. You know, only white people are nationalists. No, throughout history, nations have been founded by people of all colors, religions, creeds. So they're pushing the globalist agenda. And as it turns out, these self-proclaimed Jewish leaders from an organization called Bend the Arc, it's a PAC founded by George Soros' son, Alex, who currently serves as the board chair. So that's why they're pushing that globalist agenda here. Meanwhile, I understand that both the governor and mayor refused to meet with Trump when he paid a visit. You know, I got to tell you, I think it's shameful the way everybody is trying to politically exploit this event or any of these events. And when I was young, yes, there was going to be politics, but it was sort of kept with the politicians. We've become just like the old Soviet Union, where everything was politicized. Nothing was done without considering the political ramifications. How do we report this so it serves the state? And we're getting there. Now, the other day we talked about how two Muslim American groups organized a fundraiser to help cover the funeral costs for the victims in Pittsburgh, and they succeeded in raising $150,000. And apparently much of the money has already been delivered to the victims and their families. And they're hoping to basically cover the cost of all the funerals, which, if you know anything about funerals today, they are very expensive. It's one of the reasons why Claire and I have done the paperwork to donate our bodies to science, because we figured medical students can always use a good laugh here. So again, they're politicizing the story here, and they're using it to target the smaller social media. And they've gone after Gab, and CNN is out there saying, you know, there's got to be a limit on freedom of speech, and we've got to control this, and we've got to, you know, get cracked down on anti-Semitism. So they're pounding that as well. Another Jewish group is blaming Trump's violent rhetoric for the synagogue shooting. Now, even though the guy who pulled the trigger was anti-Trump, they're still trying to spin it that this is all somehow Trump's fault because of his violent rhetoric, which we know it was the Democrats who had the violent rhetoric, and of course Trump's support for Second Amendment rights. So everybody is just pounding on this. And it is rather shameful, I think. There should be a certain decorum involved in these things, but that's just me. Okay, getting on to the migrant horde, which is approaching our border. Story in out of Fox News, rather, basically saw that the migrants appear to be back to using trucks and buses. They're getting free rides, and the Fox News described it as the trucks just queuing up to pick up these migrants and to get them to the border as quickly as possible. Now, another Fox News reporter revealed there is an organized bus operation loading illegal immigrants for rides in Mexico. Gee, I wonder who's paying for all of this here. And here's where we start to see the true nature of these people that the Democrats want to flood into our country, because apparently some of these caravan migrants in the first group are armed. Apparently nobody bothered searching them, and two of them opened fire on the Mexican police. And fortunately, they had just one gun, and it jammed. And so they were able to arrest these two. But yeah, that's what's being brought into this country. If you import the third world into your country, you're going to import third world problems. This is a perfect example of that. Now, there are some leaked documents that prove George Soros Open Society Foundation is working with the United Nations to support this current migrant horde approaching our borders. And the United Nations has admitted that they are sending staff down there to Mexico to teach these migrants about asylum and to help them fill out the paperwork before they even leave Mexico. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the migrant horde, which is approaching our border. And we were looking at this story in which the United Nations is now admitting they have sent people into Mexico to teach these migrants about the concept of asylum and to help them fill out the paperwork. Now, apparently, a lot of these migrants were unaware of asylum, so they're not really asylum seekers. But the UN is trying to turn them into asylum seekers to get them across the border into the United States, where they will help globalize and take down our borders here. Claire was wondering if this might give Donald Trump a reason to pull out of the United Nations, and I said Israel would never allow that to happen because then they would lose their veto in the Security Council. Meanwhile, Trump has already announced that asylum seekers will not be allowed into the general population of the United States. They will be kept in tent cities. And they'll be basically not allowed to leave. And all I can say is I hope they put those tent cities someplace really, really uncomfortable. Now, there's a second migrant caravan, and it has stormed into Mexico. These people are demonstrably violent. Some are carrying bombs, and there are guns. Mexico this time sent a huge police presence down to the border because of what happened to the police they sent for the first caravan. And still, this second migrant caravan just stormed on through. Apparently, one man drowned in a river. And it's just a huge, huge mess. And again, they're armed with bombs and guns. These are the people the Democrats want to bring into your communities to live near your homes. All for the sake of getting a few more votes in the election. That's it. That's all the Democrats care about. And I'm sure they're making all kinds of promises to these migrants. If you get to here, we're going to take stuff away from the American citizens and we're going to give it to you for free. Which was used to lure a lot of the migrants into Europe. And when they didn't get the free stuff they were promised, they started acting out, which led to all the crime and the violence and the rape. Now, here's where things are going to get tricky. President Trump has stated that he wants to sign an executive order eliminating birthright citizenship. And what we're talking about here is the idea that if foreigners come into this country and they're not legal citizens, but they pop out a baby, that baby is a U.S. citizen and gets to stay in the country, and then the parents, the liberals will say, oh, you can't separate the children from the parents. The parents must be allowed to stay and become citizens. And it's a rather ridiculous situation, and it's being exploited. Huge numbers of these so-called anchor babies. That's the plan. Get across the border, get a baby out as fast as you can, and you won't be sent home. So Trump is absolutely correct on this because many nations have recently ended allowing babies born to non-citizens automatic citizenship. But Trump has a little bit of a problem because the citizenship granted by being born in this country is in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And he cannot alter the 14th Amendment with an executive order. Only another amendment can do that. Now, the 14th Amendment was passed in the wake of the Civil War, and the Citizenship Clause was intended to cement the status of the newly freed slaves as full-fledged citizens of the United States with all rights, which the Southern Democrats opposed. Now, back then, immigration wasn't a problem for the U.S. There was still plenty of room in the West. But today, the problem with the anchor babies has gone out of control, and I agree something must be done. Now, it's highly unlikely Trump will get a new amendment to change the 14th Amendment past the Democrats in the Congress and the state legislatures. So we have to go back to securing the borders and just not letting them in here in the first place. We don't need to change the 14th Amendment. We just need to enforce Title VIII. And that is a real problem with our current government. They're always talking about we need a new law. We need to pass a law to do this. We already have laws. They're not being enforced. We have laws against illegal immigrants voting. They're not being enforced. We have laws against providing any kind of aid to illegal immigrants. They're not being enforced. It's like, does Donald Trump not know that Title VIII is out there? We had an article that we actually ran at whatreallyhappened.com, basically wagging the finger at members of Congress who apparently don't know the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's no excuse for that. You're the Congress. You should have that document memorized. Now, as it turns out, when the 14th Amendment was being debated, Senator Jacob M. Howard, it's in the congressional record, basically said that the 14th Amendment will not include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, meaning their parents are foreign. And the 14th Amendment could have been written a little bit more clearly, but if a case based on this goes to the U.S. Supreme Court and the justices look at the intent of the 14th Amendment, they're going to read the words of Senator Jacob M. Howard, who's saying that no, persons born in the United States who are foreigners, because by default, because of their parentage, they're citizens of the home country, children who belong in the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers, but will include everybody else. And there was a debate, and obviously liberals don't want you to know about this, but yeah, the original intent of the 14th Amendment was that it not apply to foreign children, even if they're born here in the United States of America. Now, by the way, if Trump finds a way to end birthright citizenship for non-citizens, it will save America an estimated $2.4 billion a year. Out in Los Angeles, they've got a huge problem with anchor babies. They're cranking out more anchor babies than the entire baby population of the 14th smallest states. And taxpayers get to pay for most of those. It's a racket. It's just another racket. We need to have a sane approach to our borders. And again, I don't have a problem with legal immigrants who come in through the proper vetting system, so we know they're not criminals. We know they're not carrying contagious diseases. We know that they have skills where they will be a benefit to our society. And our immigration system does allow 1.1 million people into this country every single year. And to them, I say welcome. I hope it's not a disappointment now that you got here. The issue is the illegal immigrants. They are, by definition, criminals. And they're being allowed here without any control whatsoever. All to serve the Democrats' desire for illegal immigrant voters and George Soros' desire that all borders go away here. Now, Kirsten Sinema got caught on a Project Veritas video, basically admitting she wants amnesty for all 22 million illegal aliens in America. And by the way, that's a number you should think about. 22 million illegal aliens. That's about almost 8% of our population. Now, Harry Reid is out there, pushing open borders, let's let the illegals in, but that wasn't his tune back in 1993. And we posted this video to whatreallyhappened.com, where in 1993, from the floor of the Senate, Harry Reid was saying how no sane country would have birthright citizenship for illegal immigrants. And he's absolutely correct about that. These illegal immigrants have committed a crime, and encouraged by the liberals, They're using the 14th Amendment to sort of make the crime permanent. They don't get sent back here. Now, as you know, Donald Trump is sending 5,200 additional troops down to the border, along with portable barricades, aircraft, trucks. This is turning into a major operation, as well it should. I'm sure that whoever's in command of this operation is looking at how these migrants just blew through the Mexican police twice now, and they're going to try and learn from that mistake here. But already there is criticism of Trump's troop deployment to the border, and it's under fire. And apparently Kelly Magsamen, who served on the National Security Council and in the Pentagon during the administrations of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, basically came out and said it's a craven misuse of the U.S. Armed Forces for an obvious political stunt. And I'm surprised Secretary Mattis agreed to it, given the range of real national security threats our military has to deal with. In other words, Kelly wants the border left open. And like Kelly, there are a lot of people out there trying to criticize this and saying, no, this is not what we're going to do here. But they never have an alternative solution. But here's the situation. We now know that body of people approaching our border are armed. They are violent. They're waving the flag of a foreign nation. It is an attempt to invade our country by force, and it's perfectly appropriate for Trump to send the military down there. All right, now then, getting on back to our phony bombs out there, Paul Craig Roberts has waded on in, and basically he was talking about the press conference where they announced they'd caught the guy and how everybody was there, from the Postal Service to the FBI and Secret Service, and everybody was saying everybody else did a really great job intercepting the bombs. And he said it seemed to him to be overdone, especially in view of the FBI's now admission that they could not say the bombs were functional. I guess Christopher Wray has backed off trying to sell us on the idea that those bombs would work. So why would a bomber send non-functional bombs? It's a PR stunt. Paul Craig Roberts is on the same page. It was a desperate attempt by the Democrats to shift the dialogue on who is violent and who's the victim. And it didn't work. When I took my wife to church on Sunday, I talked to some of the people after it was all over. Everybody knew it was a fake. Nobody there believed that official story. Okay, so they're trying to up the story, saying now that Cesar Sayoc had a 100-name hit list of people who were going to get phony bombs that couldn't explode. So they're trying to up the wow factor, but it's not working. It's really not working. Now, corporate media is still out there insisting the bombs were real and they were dangerous, and CNN is quivering in their shoes because of the third package that was intercepted in Atlanta. But they're not getting traction with this one. They really aren't. All right, so let's look at the conflict zones, of which there are so many around the world. And there is a story out of the nationalinterest.org saying that staying in Afghanistan is the definition of insanity. And their argument is that the United States is not engaged in a war of national survival in Afghanistan, and therefore does not need to keep its military forces in the country. Well, the national interest is thinking in terms of pure military and threats to our borders. But that's not the issue in Afghanistan. The issues in Afghanistan are, one, that oil pipeline, which was the cause of it all those years ago, access to the opium in Afghanistan for the pharmaceutical companies, which has led to the opioid crisis, not to mention the American drug lords. And finally, the United States is in the middle of this very long plan to wage war on many, many countries around the world, and they can't be seen to lose one, because the first one they're seen to lose, that ends it all. Everybody's going to bail and say, we're going to get off the war wagon here. Now, there's another article, and this one came out of Zero Hedge, about why American leaders persist in waging losing wars. Because in point of fact, up in Afghanistan, the Taliban is regaining ground. The Afghan people are siding with the Taliban. They don't like their imposed, internationally accepted government. Back at 2001, the Taliban were all but gone. Now they're in control of the majority of the territory, especially toward the east, the mountain regions. Same thing in Syria. Still dragging on in there, and the U.S. is trying to find a way that they can restart that war, get the American people to say, yes, go back on in and get that gosh darn person, Abbas. More about that in a little bit here. But certainly it's good for the military-industrial complex, and I'm certain that everybody who's involved in all of this warmongering has a lot of those stocks in their stock portfolios, and they're getting rich off of this. But the country is being bled dry. The wealth is being shifted from the American people to the war machine. We're in a wartime economy. And it's good for those who favor war and profit from war, but it's bad for the country as a whole. Now, over the weekend, there was this four-party summit in Istanbul with representatives from Russia, Turkey, Germany, and France to talk about what they're going to do with Syria. And they issued a communique basically saying that all four of these nations are committed to Syria's territorial integrity. In other words, they're sending a message saying they will not accept the idea of breaking off chunks of Syria to give to the Kurds or to Israel. Then they went on to say that they're already making plans to deal with returning refugees, get them basically back to their homes. But one of the things that came on out from this summit of four are these incredible differences between Russia and the West over Syria. Russia wants Syria to be left to be Syria, and the West still wants to take it on over, to control the currency the oil is sold for, to impose a puppet regime, and basically just start leeching the country of its resources. And by the way, did you notice that summit of four in Istanbul? The United States was not invited to attend. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And just to show you how messed up this war in Syria is, we're literally in a situation where NATO is kind of at war with itself, because you have the Turkish army is attacking these U.S.-backed forces in northeastern Syria. And both Turkey and the United States are members of NATO. So NATO is basically at war with NATO. It's a really messed up situation. Okay, the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations is saying that the U.S.-led coalition is once again using white phosphorus bombs. Now, white phosphorus is internationally banned. It is terrible, terrible stuff. If it gets on your skin, it just burns, and it just keeps on burning. Water will not put it out. It burns right down to the bone. Its only legitimate use under international law is as a smokescreen. But we have seen the United States, not to mention Israel, using these white phosphorus bombs, or Willie Pete, onto residential areas full of non-combatants. Story coming out of ABC. Apparently, the United States is helping their Syrian partners, which means their hired mercenaries, regroup for the ICE last stand. And the U.S.-led coalition against the Islamic State says it's helping local Syrian partners regroup after a major setback over the weekend as the militants fight for their last pocket in Syria near the Iraqi border. Meanwhile, Iraq is saying they're on high alert and they will confront any militants who try and get across that border. So this is Islamic State's last stand, which I'm sure the United States cannot be happy about. Now, over the last week or so, there have been corporate media reports that Israel is still carrying out airstrikes in Syria, and that they are openly defiant of Syria's new S-300 missile defense systems. But it's now coming on out from Syria itself that they don't think it's really happening. They haven't found any damage. Nothing's blown up. Nothing's showing on the radar. And they think it's psychological warfare by Israel to try and convince Syria that their planes are in fact invisible to the S-300, and they just wasted all their money. That's what you get for buying Russian. Should have bought American. And Moscow, through the Russian Defense Ministry, is now reporting that members of the Al-Qaeda affiliated White Helmets are in Aleppo staging a new false flag chemical weapons attack to blame on the Bashar Assad government. And apparently the Russian military is saying the White Helmets have already begun filming involving foreigners. They're going to have foreigners this time. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And unfortunately, the telephone system is still down, so you cannot call into the show and call me bad names or anything like that. But our control room crew is working to try and fix the problem. Maybe we'll have them back up by hour number 3. So Russia's defense ministry is saying that the White Helmets are up to their old tricks. They're filming a new chemical weapons attack to blame on Bashar al-Assad. And apparently this latest false flag will involve foreigners. The Russians are not saying what foreigners, but they'll be picked to maximize the impact. It'll be people who are from the countries in the coalition, possibly even Americans. Now, one more time so that you are equipped to deal with people who are saying, oh, this is terrible, this is terrible. There is no reason for Bashar al-Assad to carry out a chemical weapons attack. He has pretty much won this war. He doesn't need to use chemical weapons. He knows that any chemical weapons attack would spur a new U.S. invasion to oust him from power, possibly even a direct decapitation strike. He's got nothing to gain and everything to lose with a chemical weapons attack. Who wants the chemical weapons attack? The United States. Because they want to turn this thing around. They want to go on back in. Even at the risk of direct military confrontation with the Russians. And by the way, have you noticed on all of these fake chemical weapon attacks, it's never against the enemy soldiers. It's always against children and women and civilians. So you'll feel really sorry. What a horrible thing to do. Now, Bashar al-Assad is many things. He's not a stupid man. This story never made sense. And after all the times that you have been lied to, whether it's Saddam's nuclear weapons or Assad's sarin gas or torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, it's time to basically just look at these claims and say, yeah, it's just more of the usual government bovine excrement. And I'm not buying into it anymore. Alrighty, now Turkey is calling on their affiliated militants to stand on alert for an imminent fight against the Kurds in the eastern Euphrates. And apparently Turkey was disappointed in the implementation of the Manbij Agreement, but they've ordered their affiliated militant groups in northern Syria to be prepared for battle against Kurdish militias in eastern Euphrates. So Turkey may know that something is up, and we're on a timetable here. I would expect that probably this false flag chemical attack, I mean, it's already in production, they're already filming it, but it will be basically presented, released, if you will, the day after the midterm elections. I think that's what everybody was waiting for on this one. Meanwhile, down in Yemen, they're basically on the brink of catastrophic famine, which was deliberately imposed by the Saudis. It's starvation warfare. And they're really going into this catastrophic famine. Now, Declan Welch wrote in an interactive essay for the New York Times, the insidious warfare is waging a far greater human toll. And the other day we had this article that said the death toll among civilians in Yemen is actually 5 times higher than has been presented in the media. Meanwhile, over in Great Britain, talk about ignorance is bliss, apparently 42% of Brits are unaware there's a war going on in Yemen, despite the fact that their government is providing the weapons to the Saudis. And to be fair, there are so many wars going on, it's hard to keep track of them all. We've got the war in Afghanistan, we've got the war in Syria, we were still garrisoning Iraq, we're making nasty noises toward Iran, still in Libya. It's just all over the place here. Article coming on out from Zero Hedge talking about the military escalation in Europe has become like a runaway train and it's time to slow it down. And yes, it should be slowed down. In fact, it should never have really been allowed to get started to begin with. But NATO has all their brand new weapons that you paid for, and they're holding their Trident Juncture NATO exercise right on Russia's borders. Now, when was the last time that you saw Russia having a major training exercise on the borders of the United States? On the Canadian side of our northern border, the southern side of our border with Mexico, sailing their ships around the Gulf of Mexico or out by Baja, California. When was the last time you saw that? We know who the aggressors are here. They're trying to goad Russia into this war. And maybe that's part of how they plan to depopulate the planet. We're just going to kill them all, let God sort them out. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. Down in Israel, the Palestine Liberation Organization has moved to fully withdraw from the Oslo Accord, saying that they're ending their commitment to the deal and halting all security coordination with Israel. And the Oslo Accord was signed in 1993, was supposed to increase cooperation during a transition period leading to Palestinian statehood. But with Israel's far-right leadership having made it very clear that they will never allow Palestine to be an independent state, many in the PLO are saying, what's the point? And so they're suspending their recognition of Israel. That was part of the Oslo Accords. And saying that all cooperation no longer exists. So that's going to amp things up a little bit. Might even trigger more attacks by Israel on Gaza and the West Bank. Apparently, Israeli occupation forces killed a Palestinian protester in Gaza yesterday, one day after killing 3 children in an airstrike. Supposedly, this underneath a ceasefire. There was supposed to be a ceasefire that was agreed to by everybody. Now, one of the other things that came out of the PLO is saying that Israel's deliberate targeting of Palestinian children is a war crime. And he's absolutely correct on that one. In fact, killing civilians intentionally is a war crime. So Hanan Ashwari, a member of PLO's executive committee, basically said the occupying Israeli army has been deliberately targeting and killing Palestinian children. This is a clear war crime in violation of international law and international humanitarian law. Israel's continuous campaign of excessive and indiscriminate violence against the people of Gaza has persisted with impunity and has been emboldened by the U.S. administration's strategic alliance with Israel. Okay. Now, a little bit of good news. Gaza is now able to have electricity for 8 hours per day. It had been 4 hours, but apparently the Israeli Power and Natural Resources Authority has granted the Palestinian Electricity Company to turn on the third generator of the plant. So they're going to start having a little bit more electricity. Maybe Israel is realizing how bad their treatment of the Palestinian looks, and maybe they're going to back off a little bit. Now, getting back to this idea that Israel has been sort of making fake statements about flying sorties into Syria. They are flying over Lebanon, and we're not talking about the border, which is what they normally will do when they're going to attack targets in Syria. They'll fly up the Syria-Lebanon border so they can say, technically, we're not violating anybody's airspace. Actually, technically, you're violating both airspace, unless you've got a really, really thin airplane. But apparently, yesterday, 2 Israeli warplanes flew at high altitude in the airspace of Baalbek in central Lebanon, followed by flights over the locality of Marjayun. And apparently the Israeli warplanes broke the sound barrier, rattled the windows underneath. Now, Israel's warplanes have been violating Lebanon's airspace for the past few months, which prompted Lebanese President Michael Aoun to call on the United States to pressure Israel to stop such practices, which of course did not happen. And apparently caretaker Foreign Minister Gebran Basil has said Israel has violated Lebanon's airspace, land, and sea more than 1,500 times in the past 8 months. Now, we know a lot of people in Israel's governments have been talking about yet another war against Lebanon, ostensibly to rid themselves of Hezbollah, but as a side benefit to gain access to that Litani River. The last time they were in Lebanon, they got within 20 miles of it before they were forced back. So, over in Korea, the U.S. envoy, Stephen Biegun, is saying that he's very confident that North Korean denuclearization is within reach despite growing concerns that progress has stalled. Well, progress has stalled because North Korea has made several gestures and they're waiting for something to come back from the United States. They shut down their nuclear test site. They dismantled that rocket testing stand. They returned the remains of U.S. soldiers who were killed at the start of the Korean War. North and South Korea are clearly making moves toward reunification. In terms of the logistics and technicalities, the Korean War is now over. They're disarming the DMZ. They're starting to dig up the mines. The artillery's been put in storage. And it's pretty much it. But Kim Jong-un is now waiting for the United States to do something to indicate they want to move forward with the process. But the U.S. is still sending those airplanes to threaten North Korea, the naval exercises off the coast. The U.S. is sticking with that attitude, you give us everything that we want first, and then we'll talk. What North Korea and South Korea both want from the United States right now is a formal declaration that the Korean War is over. And all that takes is a signature by Trump. But he's not doing it here. Meanwhile, the Strategic Command of the U.S. Armed Forces has announced the beginning of its annual military exercises for the Strategic Nuclear Forces. It's called Global Thunder 2019. And the war games are being conducted to curb, locate, and, if necessary, avert strategic attacks on the U.S. and its allies. And they're going to be focusing on what's called the nuclear triad, which are the bombers that are in the air, the submarine-launched ballistic missile systems, and, of course, the missiles that are in silos here on the continental United States of America. But again, in all the history of nuclear warfare, there's only ever been one country that has actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country, and that is, of course, the United States of America. Now, getting on back to Trump's Space Command, Russia is developing 21st century pulse and laser weapons to destroy U.S. satellites. When World War III starts for real, they're going to turn near-Earth orbit into a junkyard, an orbiting minefield that nobody's going to be able to get through. And a lot of people are recalling back to the 1980s when another war hawk president, Reagan, promised the Americans would be able to produce a Star Wars weapons system. And the program was based on the use of lasers. But it really did not work on out all that well. And it was a huge amount of money that was spent, much of it borrowed. In fact, it was during the 12 years of Reagan-Bush that the United States went from being one of the world's largest creditor nations to one of the world's largest debtor nations. And very little of actual use was produced. Now, the reason has to do with the fact that the lasers were supposed to be ground-based for the most part. And, of course, you have the problem getting through the atmosphere. But Russia has apparently made leaps and bounds in the development of space weapons and weapons that can reach space. Their new S-500 can actually reach objects in near-Earth orbit. And it's going to be a bad idea, but yeah, when the war starts for real, they're going to be going after those satellites. Reconnaissance satellites, anything that might be carrying a weapon. Now, there are treaties saying you cannot weaponize space, but given how the United States is pulling out of treaties, I imagine that one will probably fall by the wayside sometime soon. In fact, a lot of people are wondering about what this robotic space shuttle is doing up there in orbit. And it's on its current mission, it's been up there for over 400 days. Is it carrying surveillance equipment? Is it carrying a bomb? Nobody really knows here. Okay, so let's talk about the economic news here. Apparently, well, our stock market had a good day today. Not spectacular, but a good day. But overall, you can see the trend. The stocks have been in trouble this last week. The yuan has been in trouble. And it's all being triggered on this report that if Trump does not get what he wants with his upcoming meeting of Xi Jinping, that there's going to be another $257 billion of tariffs imposed on China imports. So that's got everybody rattled over there. Now, on the other side, as you know, Angela Merkel has announced she's stepping down as head of the Christian Democratic Union this December and will not run for re-election as chancellor when her term expires in 2021. That shot the European markets up. They saw that as incredibly good news. All right. Now, Iran's major oil buyers are going to defy the U.S. sanctions. And Iran's, at least 3 of Iran's top oil clients, India, China, and Turkey, are saying they're going to go on buying oil from Iran. And the reasoning is very simple. There are not sufficient supplies in other places to replace the volume of oil they get from Iran. So it's a very pragmatic situation. So is Trump going to hit India, China, and Turkey with more sanctions? Turkey's already a loose cannon on deck. That's not going to help the situation. Story coming on out from Zero Hedge. Egon von Greyers is basically a gold broker. And he met with a large group of individuals from China that manage money for the elites in China. And basically, they're buying gold. They just took delivery of a massive amount of gold from London and New York. And it's basically coming from the gold reserves, the gold bullion vaults. Very little of it is coming from mines. Mining output is actually very, very low. And the concern is that China will soon own enough gold to actually be able to influence the gold price. Take away that London daily fixed monopoly. And it once again raises the question, Are these gold vaults at J.P. Morgan and the New York Fed and the Bank of England? Are they rehypothecating other people's gold? Because nobody's been allowed to go down there and actually do a count. And we covered this again at History Channel, America's Book of Secrets, the gold conspiracy. It may be that the United States doesn't really have much gold anymore. There's been a continuous flow of gold out of our country rather than in. So apparently the gold is going from London and New York to Switzerland, that is recasting it, and from there it goes to China. And it's probably going to stay there. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America, welcome back to our show here. So we're talking about gold. We're talking about where is it, who's really got it. We know that Russia and China and a lot of other countries are stocking up on gold because they understand at some point this ink and paper fiat currency empire is going to come crashing down. And they want something on which to base a new commodity-based currency. And right now, gold demand is up by something like 42%. Now, the prices aren't reflecting it just yet because there's a lot of manipulation going on. And again, we talked about that on America's Book of Secrets. Okay. We had a caller yesterday who was talking about Brazil's new president, Jair Bolsonaro. Okay, say that 3 times fast. And what does his victory mean? And apparently, somebody was trying to put together sort of a South American Union. You know, there's the North American Union, there's the European Union, and apparently there was an attempt to create a South American Union called the Southern Common Market. But the new Brazilian president's economic guru, Paulo Guedes, has suggested that the country is going to head for a soft Brexit. They want out. So I'm sure George Soros is very unhappy because his plan was to create all these little unions and then merge them into one global government, one planet, one private central bank. Mish Shedlock is out there saying that California has become ground zero in the upcoming real estate bust. And it's 2007, 2008, all over again. The money junkies did not learn any lessons from that disaster because the pain from that disaster was dropped onto ordinary people through TARP, bailouts. Except for Lehman Brothers, all those people are still in business. They all got to keep their jobs, their stock options. And part of the problem is, of course, that real estate is being sold not as something that you live in and use, but something that is an investment that will always grow in value. And no, it doesn't. There'll be a bubble and it will burst. And right now in California, because people can't afford the sky-high housing prices, prices are starting to come down. And so a lot of people in California are now finding themselves living in homes whose mortgage debt is now more than the house itself is worth. There's no equity in there whatsoever. So we're going to have another one here. Okay, apparently, at the rate we're going right now, the U.S. government will borrow over $1.3 trillion with a T dollars this year. And it's a huge amount of money, even as the government claims that they're enjoying record tax collections, but still they have to borrow over $1.3 trillion in 2018. Where is it all going? Well, obviously much of it is going to the war machine. And a little bit of it goes to Israel. And a lot of it goes to pay the interest on the existing national debt. That's a huge line item. If we had stayed with the system that this country started with a government-issued value-based currency that circulated without accruing interest, this nation would not be in this mess that we're in. A little over 100 years ago was the point where this nation was put on the path to disaster and doom with the creation of the Federal Reserve. Now, for young people who are just now being born, kids are being born this year. By the time they reach retirement age, the United States national debt will be 6 times the size of the economy, of the entire economy. It's unpayable. It's absolutely unpayable. Over in San Francisco, they're dealing with yet another crisis having to do with the economy. People who have lost their homes, lost their condos, can't afford an apartment. They're living in recreational vehicles, some of which are not in the best of repair, and they just find a place to park, and they live out of the recreational vehicle, which is at least a little more secure than living out of a tent. But officials in San Francisco are looking at maybe trying to set up some kind of giant parking lot where there'll be electrical hookups, trash cans, portable toilets, and try and get these people taken care of this way. And again, you cannot look at the homeless crisis in this country and say that this is a good economy. It's just wildly out of control. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the economic news. And as I was saying before the commercial break, you can't look at all of these tent cities. You can't look at all of these people living out of their cars, even though they have jobs, and say that this is a working economy. You can't. Now, there's a story that was over in governmentslaves.info, which basically says, after you take into consideration the cost of living, which is definitely rising, 62% of jobs in America will not support a middle-class life. The middle class is being erased, and that's intentional because it's always from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy will emerge. And every time a tyrant or a despot comes to reign in a country, they try and get rid of that middle class. Everybody is either the nobility and the elites, or they're the serfs, the serf class. And we're seeing it happen, especially out in California. So, and again, I remember that story about this person, full-time job with Google. And we know Google's got lots of money. Full-time job with Google, had to live in their car. That's apparently the new normal that young people are supposed to accept. Either live in your car or stay in your family's home. Turning to immigration in other parts of the world, apparently there's been another major upset over in Germany. 7 Syrians have been arrested, along with 1 German citizen who I guess went along with them. And they basically were accused of raping an 18-year-old student. And apparently the men had been on the police radar long before the arrest for other alleged wrongdoings, which drew sharp criticism from the public, saying, if you knew these guys were doing this, why didn't you do something about it? So over in the university city of Freiburg in southern Germany, there were 2,000 demonstrators, and apparently the Alternative for Germany party brought around 500 people to protest the crimes committed by refugees and Chancellor Angela Merkel's immigration policy, repeating demands for stricter migrant control following the arrest of the suspects. Now, we have been seeing this all over Europe. Sweden is now the rape capital of the world. Somehow these migrants got it into their head that rape is okay in Europe and the United States. And as I said before, they were lured to Europe. They're being lured to the United States with all kinds of promises of free stuff. And when they don't get it, they act out. They turn violent. They turn criminal. Okay. Over in Fairfax County, Virginia, this happened earlier this year. Dash cam footage was released that showed police shooting and killing an unarmed man they claimed was responsible for a hit and run. However, the man was actually the victim of a traffic accident, and the video shows that he then became the victim of murder by police. They just shot him. And after sitting on this whole story for almost a year, the police report was finally released, showing that yes, indeed, the victim was unarmed, the shooting was unjustified. The family of the man is now suing the park police for $25 million, which means you, the taxpayers, get to cover that. But the victim, Bijan Geizar, was 25 years old, was shot in the head 4 times. 4 times. Okay, and you're going to love this next one. You are going to love this next one. Remember James Whitey Bulger was an organized crime lord, notorious mobster. At the same time, he was a secret FBI informant. And he was killed after being transferred to a federal prison in West Virginia. And he was killed just 1 day after the transfer. I'm not sure the timing is a coincidence. What's really interesting is that a lot of the news coverage on the corporate media is just saying simply that he died. But apparently the officials at the prison do have a suspect who is linked to the mafia and suspect he may have done it. So again, in this story that came out of the Gateway Pundit, they're saying, yes, Bulger was killed in prison by a fellow inmate with mafia ties. And Bulger was reportedly wheeled away from security cameras and beaten with a lock in a sock. Apparently there was some mutilations as well. Now, the Daily Mail is saying that Whitey Bulger was about to go public on his years as an FBI informant. Now, why is that important? Well, because in order to protect Whitey Bulger, the FBI in Massachusetts allowed 4 innocent men to be sent to prison. And Robert Mueller was up to his neck in that whole situation. So, last May, Representative Louis Gohmert published a 48-page report called Robert Mueller Unmasked to expose his decades of corruption. And it did go into the detail of Mueller's shady past of helping mobster Whitey Bulger by eliminating mob competitors. Now, Bulger played the FBI because he used his position as an informant to inform on people he wanted to get rid of. So, apparently, a former parole board member was threatened by 2 FBI agents for considering parole for the 4 men in prison for a crime they did not commit. And, of course, later that same year, Mueller was appointed director of the FBI because it was Robert Mueller, first as an assistant U.S. attorney, then as acting U.S. attorney in Boston, who wrote letters to the parole and pardon boards throughout the 1980s opposing clemency for the 4 men framed by FBI lies. And of course, Mueller was also in that position when Whitey Bulger was helping the FBI cart off his criminal competitors, even as he buried bodies in shallow graves along the Neponset River. So it's an ugly episode. So who ordered the hit on Whitey Bulger? Well, obviously members of the mafia who were harmed by his being an informant. They're not very gentle with informants. Or it could have even been the FBI because somebody decided to move Bulger where this other guy could get at him. And I don't think the mafia has the juice to do that. Mueller may be feeling a little bit nervous between these rape allegations now and all the rest of it. He may be feeling that his facade is starting to come on down. Okay, let's see. Still going on about the migrant caravan here. Tomorrow is Halloween. And hopefully these storms are going to be gone by then, or Claire and I are going to be stuck with an awful lot of candy. But I'm still amazed at how the social justice warriors and they're politicizing Halloween. Halloween, you're supposed to dress up. You dress the way you want to. And everybody's out there saying, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're going to offend people. There are schools that have literally issued lists of acceptable costumes to wear. And it's basically a very short list because anything that could offend anybody anywhere is now banned. And one of the more interesting stories involves the Disney film Moana, which was set here in Polynesia. It's a very popular film. And apparently there are Moana costumes that are for sale that were drawing criticism from the social justice warriors. It's cultural appropriation. It's offensive. It's going to be offensive to the Polynesians. Well, the star of the film, Auli'i Cravalho, basically went public saying this is not cultural appropriation, and I certainly don't think it's racist if they want to dress up as Moana and just have some fun, because that's really what it's all about. Now, Shaun White decided to dress up as a character from the movie Tropic Thunder, back in 2008, and he dressed up as the character of Simple Jack. Now, Simple Jack was the guy who supposedly had been crippled in war, and he had 2 hooks on his hands, and he'd sold a book, and this was the movie from the book, and he was making a lot of money, and of course halfway through the movie it turns out he's a fake, that he has his hands, he just wears these things to scam people. So Shaun White wanted to dress up as Simple Jack and immediately got attacked by the Special Olympics. Oh, it's offensive. It's offensive. Okay, how about the fact that I'm planning to dress up as a pirate tomorrow to greet the trick-or-treaters at our house? And I was thinking about, pulling one leg up underneath my cloak and having a wooden peg there. Am I now offensive to the Special Olympics? Let the kids have their fun. And the other one that I'm appalled by are all these municipalities, rented lips, all these municipalities who are issuing orders that trick-or-treaters have to be under a certain age. Don't these city governments have more important things to do, like maybe fixing the potholes in the road? It's like they're tinkering with Halloween because they can't do anything else. They can't get anything else to work. But by golly, we're going to get those trick-or-treaters under control. And by the way, I don't think they realize that by limiting the age of trick-or-treaters, they're literally harming sales from their local grocery stores, who are right now busy selling candy and gummy bears and all the rest of that stuff. We've become a nation of whiners and crybabies and snowflakes. And as I keep saying, liberals' whole identity and sense of self-worth now rests on always being offended by something and using that offense to try and exert their control over other people's lives. Which, if you look at most liberals, I think they need to get their own lives under control first before they start running around screaming about Halloween costumes here. Okay, so getting on into computers. As you know, Gab is being blamed for allowing the synagogue shooter to have an account on their website. And as a result, they have been taken offline by GoDaddy. They've also been banned by shopping cart service Shopify, PayPal, payment processor Stripe, the web hosting service Joylent, and even blog site Medium have all dropped them. And apparently the founder of Gab is now receiving death threats. Now the good news is Gab says it expects to be back online by this weekend, could even be earlier. But apparently they have a new hosting provider, somebody who realizes just how silly all of this stuff has been. And they will be back, and I may start spending a little more time there myself. I mean, the shutdown of Gab, the shutdown of InfoWars, proves we do not have freedom of speech in this country. And no, silencing conservatives does not protect democracy. It's one of the more ridiculous things the pro-censorship people have come on out with here. Story out of Investment Watch blog. Social media sites continue to silence people at the behest of those in power. And our ruling oligarchs have basically abandoned even the illusion of freedom of speech. And they're openly clamping down against dissent. You will not say anything bad about Israel. You will not say anything bad about vaccines. You will not say anything bad about GMOs. Post a funny kitten video if you really feel like you must. But it is part of our descent into tyranny here. And some of this is coming obviously from the government. Some is coming from corporate media itself, which doesn't like the competition. And apparently Bill Kristol, who's a neocon thought leader, he's out there saying, yeah, it's, we have to defend democracy by fighting fake news. Well, what Bill Kristol is saying is fake news is anything he doesn't like. And all of these social media companies, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Google, they're trying to defend what they're doing by saying they're opposed to fake news. But no, they're not. They're basically attacking conservative points of view and any point of view that does not line up with the official narrative. So now these companies are going to official fact checkers who are all very much embedded with the deep state. And let's see, Think Progress was shut down here. Apparently the Christian news site LifeSite has now been blacklisted by their web host. So LifeSite is this Christian pro-life news outlet, and they were given just 12 hours to find another host for the website or risk being offline. And so they're scrambling to find a new provider here. Twitter has now suspended investigative journalist Laura Loomer until Election Day. That one's clearly politically motivated. Now, we put a link up to a story, and we've shown this once before. The problem is it's getting better and better. There is this software that can take one person's face while they're talking and basically make another person look just like it. And the demonstration that they had there was Stephen Colbert and the guy from Last Week Tonight, John Oliver. And it's very convincing. If you look closely, there are artifacts. But this kind of software can be used to make videos of people saying things they never actually said. And apparently these bogus news videos are being funded by a British government research body. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently the phones are still not working. So I'm just going to keep on talking here. Somebody just sent me a rather interesting little email. Apparently, back in 2004, Ireland held a vote that stopped the Anchor Baby program or law in their country, and apparently it was a 79% were in favor of that ban. Apparently, there are only 30 countries on Earth that still allow babies born of foreign nationals on their soil to have automatic citizenship. And I think clearly the United States is out of step with the rest of the world on this here. Meanwhile, we're hearing that Lindsey Graham is going to introduce a bill ending birthright citizenship. Now, he describes this birthright citizenship as an absurd policy, and going on back and reading the congressional record of the debate over the 14th Amendment, it is very clear that it was not intended to be used in this way. And the good news about all of this, of course, is that Trump has succeeded in making the immigration issue front and center for the upcoming midterms, and that's certainly not what the Democrats wanted, because they know the majority of Americans basically want stronger immigration. They look at the Democrats as being behind the weakening of our borders, which is certainly true. So Lindsey Graham says, congrats to Trump for taking on the absurd policy, and he's going to introduce some legislation to do that. Now, again, this is probably going to wind up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and if the Supreme Court looks at the intent of the framers by reading the actual congressional record, I think they'll rule that, yeah, the 14th Amendment does not in fact cover somebody just stepping into our country illegally and plopping out a baby and granting it automatic citizenship. So we'll see. Okay. Now then, as you know, we are being surveilled left, right, up, down, sideways. And there is a system being developed at Purdue University by a doctoral student, Suyan Kao. And apparently this Purdue University Symbolab has developed what's called a camera-to-human surveillance program called FADE, which stands for Private Human Addressing. And it's very appropriate because the whole point of this program is your privacy will fade away. And what the system basically does is it's watching through surveillance cameras and pinging cell phones in front of it in order to identify the person who's standing there and get their IP information in order to presumably send them text notices that are unique to them, right out of Minority Report. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break here for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And I'm afraid, as far as I can tell, the phones are still down. So I'm just going to keep on talking here. And I'm going to have to pad a lot because I normally expect a certain amount of phone calls to fill up the show. And anyway, so we're talking about this system called FADE, and the way it works is there's a surveillance camera that is watching you walk around, and then it will basically get the motion data from your smartphone, from all the smartphones around it, and match them up, and thereby be able to send a specific text message to a specific individual, which I think is a little bit creepy here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this polio-like disorder affecting kids in the USA. And there's a pair of doctors, Jack Wolfson and Heather Wolfson. They're a husband and wife team of holistic doctors, and they're talking about this acute flaccid paralysis. And according to these doctors, all these different names are basically given to people with sudden weakness. And it may actually be all the same thing. But they keep changing the name and basically saying, we need donations to fight whatever. So poliomyelitis, acute flaccid paralysis, transverse myelitis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and myasthenia gravis are basically labels to people who are showing symptoms of polio. And in fact, they're theorizing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's polio may have actually been Guillain-Barré syndrome and could have resulted from a vaccine or from exposure to pesticides. What is certain is that the oral polio vaccine itself is a known cause of whatever you're going to call it, polio or acute flaccid paralysis. And the vaccine has been withdrawn from the U.S. markets, but millions around the world are still being given it. Now, when this problem first surfaced, when doctors started saying, I'm diagnosing polio in this kid, and the medical industrial complex came on back and said, well, you can't call it that because we're going to get sued for that polio vaccine. So make up a new name and don't talk about anything related to polio. They were afraid of the lawsuits, or at least the lost business here. Now, it's nice to hear once again from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And again, I'm disappointed in Trump because he was going to look into this issue. And I think he's got a personal stake in vaccine safety. And I'm not going to go into details. You can probably figure out what I'm talking about. But he dropped the ball on that one. And in theory, the Vaccine Safety Commission is still in existence under the control of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but if they are accomplishing anything, it certainly is never going to be reported on the corporate TV news because they're dependent on those glitzy, expensive, well-produced pharmaceutical commercials. So anyway, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree, who was producer of the suppressed anti-vaccine documentary Vaxxed and the Informed Consent Action Network, filed a lawsuit, and they demanded the relevant government records proving that all federally approved vaccines had been tested for quality over the past 32 years. Now, originally they just filed a Freedom of Information Act request, and it came back saying, no, we're not going to give you the documents. Now, there's nothing classified about any of this, but for a vaccine to be approved by the federal government, there is a requirement that these vaccines are tested and retested for quality on a regular basis. Make sure that they've got what's supposed to be in there, that there are no contaminants. So they went to court and they won a victory, and here was the final outcome. It turned out there are no documents. The government has not, in fact, been testing the vaccines. They just ignored the legal requirement. The FDA said, this is now approved, go ahead, shove it in your arm. Well, this obviously is a failure of the federal government, which is supposed to be protecting us from corporations that make mistakes or rush products into the marketplace way too soon. And they just sat on it. They didn't do anything. We keep seeing this over and over again, like when the Securities Exchange Commission just sat there and ignored Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme to the tune of $60+ billion. Now, the legal ramifications of this are that the government could potentially be sued for malfeasance. The health implications, though, are that we don't know what was in those vaccines. We don't know if the ingredients on the product packaging are what was really in those ampules. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So we don't know what is being shot into the arms of our kids. We don't know if there's something harmful in there. We just know it's a big money maker, and they just keep pushing this on and on and on and on. Sometimes feels like the world is going crazy, like too many people are on prescription antidepressants here. Okay, out in California, or Cucafornia, I'm going to start calling it there, apparently second grade children were actually exposed to a drag queen who was labeled as an historical leader to celebrate. Now, this all started when California passed a law which forced schools to include pro-LGBT historical leaders. And so, in typical Cucafornia fashion, they jumped right in by propping up a drag queen man with a criminal past. Now, these are 7 and 8-year-old kids. And I think the parents would be very upset about this, but apparently the textbooks out there are pushing the LGBT agenda. They're from Pearson Publishing, which was the company behind Common Core. And I remember when Common Core first came on out, and teachers were literally being told, do not let the parents see the textbooks. And as I've mentioned before, for a while we used to have a neighbor who was out here in Hawaii helping the state implement Common Core. And she eventually resigned, went back home. But there's a lot of stuff in there that would be angering to people, and I'm not just talking about the LGBT stuff. It has paraphrased the Bill of Rights into a form the U.S. government wants. It's teaching kids that rights are granted by the government and can be withdrawn at any time, which is not what is in the original Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights recognizes pre-existing rights the government may not intrude on. One of the worst abuses was their rewriting of the Second Amendment to say that you're allowed to keep and bear arms if you're in a government militia. Okay, all right, I have just been told that the phones are now working, so 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443, so we're good to go here. Whew, down to the wire on that one. Over at NASA, they are finally coming to terms with the fact that they're never going to see or contact the Opportunity rover again. It's been out of contact for 4 months ever since that major dust storm was encircling the red planet. Now the skies cleared mid-September, but in all probability it left a lot of dust on the solar panels, and so they're going to stop trying to contact it probably end of this week. And that's always a very sad experience for the flight controllers when a mission comes to an end. Because you work that hard on something, you kind of get attached to it here. Again, coming from NASA, their Parker Solar Probe is now closer to the sun than any spacecraft has ever been before. And it surpassed the previous record of 26.6 million miles set by Helios 2 back in 1976. And of course, it's going to fly closer and closer to the sun until it flies through the corona or outer atmosphere for the first time next week. And they're hoping that it will get within 15 million miles of the solar surface. Okay, and once again, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Over in Belgium, people are very upset because in the city of Bruges, there are organizers of this Christmas market, and they have decided to change their name to the Winter Market so as not to offend the Muslims. And apparently, instead of Christmas-themed lighting, the market will be lit up with winter lighting. That's, I think, going a little too far. That it's not an issue of tolerance, it's an issue of cultural surrender. And I remember a few years ago, I saw the same thing going on here in the United States, specifically around the holiday of Easter, where there were bags of these plastic eggs that you were supposed to fill with treats to hand out to the kids for Easter egg hunt. And I noticed that there was no symbology on the eggs that had anything to do with the holiday or traditions of Easter. Yeah, they had teddy bears and stars and all kinds of things like that. But I think somebody complained because the following year it was back. Here's what it comes down to, and Teddy Roosevelt said it best. If you want to come to this country, welcome. But understand you are living in the United States of America. We have our ways of doing things. We have one language, which is English. We have our set of laws that must be obeyed. I'm paraphrasing loosely, but absolutely that was That's the way it's supposed to work. If you go to another country to live, you assimilate into that culture. In your private home, you can be your home country, you can speak your home language, but when you're outside in that society, the polite, respectful thing to do is to learn the language, learn the laws, and basically try and fit in. And this whole George Soros open borders agenda has stood that on its head, where we have people who are coming into countries, not their own, and then making demands that their religion be respected, that their language be used. And that is not entirely new either, because I remember when I lived back in Southern California, there was already a movement there to try and demand the city have bilingual Spanish signs all over the place. In fact, some were saying they should be Spanish anyway, because a lot of Mexicans still think California ought to be part of Mexico, forgetting that Sam Houston did get a signed document from General Santa Anna ceding all of those territories to the United States of America. All right, so let's see. Let's look through and see if we can find some other things to talk about here. And apparently Matt Drudge is on the warpath against Fox, saying it's a sham company. And little piece of advice here. What do you do when you're feeling overwhelmed by all the terrible things going on? And that's a question that Claire and I ask ourselves all the time. And we're seeing our culture, our society, being ripped to shreds before our eyes. There's so much hatred out there that's being encouraged. It's like violence and hatred is supposed to be the new societal norm. And I think most people really do want to just live peaceful lives. They want to be left alone. They don't want to intrude on other people. They're probably getting very, very tired of all the social justice warriors running around and saying, well, I'm offended by you doing that, so don't do that anymore. That's how they feel empowered. That's how they feel that they're in control. Okay, and let's see. Somebody just sent me a story about UNICEF. And apparently their yearly masquerade ball for Halloween was filled with all kinds of creepy symbolism here. The advertised goal, of course, is to raise money for children. But they were saying it looked a lot like Eyes Wide Shut. So, yeah, I'm looking at some of these photos here. There are Satan costumes and a lot of very sexy dressed ladies. And by the way, that's something else that's on all the ban lists. Oh, you can't have sexy girl costumes. I agree for the little kids, yeah, shouldn't. But for the older girls, let them dress up the way they want. Again, it's supposed to be a holiday. You're supposed to enjoy yourself. You shouldn't have to be running around the costume rack over at Party City trying to say, who am I going to offend with this one? Who am I going to offend with that one? I keep thinking back to that Australian comedian. You know, go ahead, be offended. I don't care. So we're a nation of people who are just way too thin-skinned here. Okay, getting on back here. Talked about Laura Loomer, suspended from Twitter. Apparently Canada is still planning to welcome back the white helmets from Syria. Okay. And once again, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Apparently the Air Force is actually considering rocket launches to move cargo around the globe. And I guess the idea is they want to get the cargo where it needs to go a lot quicker than current technology allows. But the United States already has this fleet of military cargo planes to project its influence and move stuff around the world. So now apparently the U.S. Air Force is considering this possibility. Rocket launches that blast cargo into space to land anywhere in the world within half an hour. And I can imagine that that will cost a great deal of money, but then it's not like they're spending their own money. But apparently last week at a military conference outside Dallas, Air Force officials confirmed the service has met with private space companies to discuss the possibility. Apparently they've already sat down with SpaceX to talk about that. And apparently Blue Origin and Virgin Orbital are also looking to get into this business, to get all this cargo around the world. Okay, let's see. Somebody just sent me an email. Being offended thickens the skin, builds character, makes a man strong. Well, when I was growing up, it was always sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. We were raised to just not care if other people said bad things about us. Alrighty. Okay. Somebody sent me the exact Roosevelt quote here. And apparently, here we go. Here's the exact quote from Theodore Roosevelt. We should insist that if the immigrant who comes here does in good faith become an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else. For it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. All right, I'm going to read you the rest of this when we come back from this commercial break. And again, phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. We have callers on the line. Hallelujah. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about Theodore Roosevelt. And apparently there are several versions of this quotation making the rounds on the net attached to graphics. But this apparently is the original letter that he wrote. And it is a little bit different from what we've been seeing online. We should insist that if the immigrant who comes here does in good faith become an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the man's becoming in every fact an American and nothing but an American. If he tries to keep segregated with men of his own origin and separated from the rest of America, then he isn't doing his part as an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. For we intend to see that the crucible turns our people out as Americans of American nationality and not as dwellers in a polyglot boarding house. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. And that really does say it all. Okay, we're going to take some phone calls now. I'm so glad the phones are working. Terry in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you just said loyalty to America, and that excludes the Zionists that put Israel first and all the rest of the second. But what I really wanted to say is you're a proponent of legal immigration, and I would submit from the stories I've heard that whole system is corrupted as well. I mean, we're looking at these caravans coming up, and we should, but it's one little drop in the whole immigration thing that has got some real problems. So we need some people looking at that normal immigration system and, see what's going on there, because I don't think it's all up and up like you might think it is. And,
well, I imagine like anything else in the government, it's open for corrupting influences and political pressure. In fact, I know for a fact it is. But it's still better than just opening up the borders and letting people who are carrying bombs and guns and contagious diseases pour on in.
Absolutely. But we ought to start looking at the legal thing too, because that's corrupted as well, and we need to straighten that out. So, and the other thing you said the other day that kind of disturbed me a little bit. After the country comes down, you're going to have a constitutional convention, and that kind of scares me. Anybody talks about that kind of scares me. What's wrong with the one we got, and just making some laws to clean it up a little bit where it's not abused?
Well, I think when the country comes on down, I think the very first thing the American people should say is that all these former career politicians and officials are not allowed to be part of the Continental Convention.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, I mean, you want to start over from scratch, with a Continental Convention, Constitutional Convention. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'd like to start with our current Constitution and the first 13 amendments. I think that's a good starting point because it reestablishes the republic as it was intended to be. And we're probably going to have to add some other things in there to basically set in stone certain things like campaign donation limits. We need to learn the lessons from the last 200 some odd years of things that were obviously overlooked by the founding fathers. They were great men, and they came up with a really good idea for a completely new way to run a country. But in hindsight, they did miss a few things. And we know now, of course, that while they intended for the 14th Amendment to not apply to children of foreigners born on our soil, it wasn't clearly written that way. And in fact, to be very brutally honest, if you read the Constitution as it was actually written, you will spot there are occasional grammar mistakes. So they did make a few goofs that we need to correct.
Okay, I'll go along with that scenario. Okay, Mike, thanks. I appreciate you letting me make my point.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. And Mark, I'm probably going to have to take you through the next commercial break. What's on your mind? Mark, are you there?
Hello? Yeah, I'm there. You hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay, yeah. What's on my mind is Whitey Bulger. I disagree with you, what you said about him being an FBI informant. No, he was the actual agent in charge of the Boston office of the FBI while he was there. And you know who his consigliere was? It was, what's his name? It was our friend, Mr. The special prosecutor there.
Mueller. Well, that's a very, very interesting theory. And I think we're going to end the call on that point here. It's an interesting theory. We've got to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the phones here, Fox News is running the story about Hillary Clinton saying mixed signals, where she says she wants to be president, but she doesn't want to run again, which I think it doesn't work that way. All right, let's go back to the phones here to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The republic for which it stands, not the empire, Mike. That's the difference. We're not America anymore. I keep saying it. We are an empire. That's what people don't realize.
Yes.
It's not what the founding fathers envisioned, because George Washington and the founding fathers fought an empire. The British Empire, we've become what we fought against. How sad is that?
Yes.
And no matter, Mike, I hate to say it, there's got to be some kind of new laws set up because human beings, the power-hungry ones, will always be around, always until the end of time, right?
Yep.
Since the caveman days. So that's all I needed to say on that. And, Mike, I want to talk about Trump. Trump's worth a couple billion, supposedly. Is he going to pay for the tents that he's setting up for the refugees?
No, I think the open borders people should be made to pay for those.
Yeah, because, there's a lot of homeless vets out there that don't have any tents. They're sleeping out on the street.
Yep.
So I wonder if they're going to get hot meals given to them and all these other things. It's amazing, Mike? All these groups can bring the refugees in. They pay for them. They gas for the trucks to bring them in. But none of these people are around at all when it comes to the homeless vets or the homeless people on the street, right?
Exactly.
They're not. Hollywood's not around for them. They don't care. Can you hold me over?
You've got a lot of time ahead of you.
Oh, I thought I heard the music come. Mike, and I just wanted to say one more thing about did you hear about the Admiral Kuchanov incident where they're retrofitting it and the walkway gave way around the ship and the crane fell on the top of the flight deck of the aircraft carrier in Russia?
Oh, no, I hadn't heard that. That's a bad mistake.
It's a floating dock. They had a power issue, and I guess the floating dock, it sinks down, so I guess it pumps water in or out of the dock so it goes down below the ship line.
Yes.
And something happened, but the crane fell across it. There's a hole in the flight deck, but I mean, it's being retrofitted. It's already been moved to another dock to get fixed, so, but it was going to be out of commission anyway, so, but they don't know the extent of the damage yet. But most likely it'll be repaired and, sent on its way. But, yeah, I don't know I still don't think they should have more than one aircraft carrier because, aircraft carriers are a sign of an empire, basically, right? I mean, because they project power,
Well,
Russia doesn't.
Again, I think that would be debatable. I mean, certainly the United States has more carriers than any other nation, especially of the so-called super carriers. But I think Russia right now and China and a lot of other countries are saying the U.S. is taking the world to war. We'd better get ready for it now and not get caught off guard.
And China knows this because did you see Xi Jinping? He's telling them to get ready for war.
Yes.
And as the president of China saying that, not me.
Yes.
So, and then one more thing, Mike, real quick about Angela Merkel and Macron. They basically being at that summit with Putin and Erdogan, they're basically saying they're off the regime change bandwagon. The only countries that are going to be on it still is Britain and the United States. And that's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good rest of the show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Steve? There?
Steve Elkins?
I'm here.
Okay, there you are.
Yes, I'm here. I would like to see some government responsibility, fiscal responsibility, and the ending of this raising of the debt ceiling, which does not encourage fiscal responsibility. I am really getting tired of that. You can't do that. I can't do it. We can't call up our creditors, Visa, and say, hey, up my maximum on my Visa card. I'm getting a little tired of this whole, well, we'll afford it by just raising the debt ceiling. And I'd like to see somebody step up to the plate on that issue. Stop this nonsense of raising the debt ceiling. It doesn't encourage any kind of responsibility, economic responsibility. I'd like to see somebody finally step up and do something about that.
Well, Ron Paul was trying to make that an issue, which is why they worked so hard to get him out of the race.
Yeah, that's it. I haven't heard anybody else other than Ron Paul. That's it.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, 100 years ago when they created the Federal Reserve, the U.S. became trapped by that debt. And the reason there's no way out is because, of course, the Federal Reserve and Wall Street are very generous donors to candidates, and especially in an age where there are no more limits to campaign donations, or the limits are way up high. Yeah, Congress is not going to do anything that upsets the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve wants the debt to increase because that way they get more money in the interest payments. And it can't last forever. But the people who are running the Federal Reserve, they just want their goodies today. And, the crash and the problems, that'll be down the road. That's somebody else's problem to deal with.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, a prediction on Merkel. Is she going to make it to 2021, or is she going to be out soon, very soon?
I think that there may actually be a move to get her to step down as chancellor before then.
Right. Yeah, that's it. That's it for me, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And, yeah, I would say I would not be surprised to see it happen At the same time, she steps down from the leadership position in the Christian Democratic Union. Her opponents might just hold the door open and say, look, as long as you're on your way out, why don't you go all the way out here? Okay, let's go to James in Kansas. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
According to the YouTube site, DirtyUncleSam.com, the 14th Amendment was not properly ratified. And Bruce Ray Riggs is the guy that the granddaddy of that website, and he used to be a frequent guest on RBN starting at 9 p.m. weekdays. And it was just signed by the Seward, the Secretary of State, and numerous states voted didn't have the right number of votes for it.
Well, we know that there are more than a few amendments whose actual ratification is very much in doubt. And, of course, that was in a day and age where Congress felt they could do whatever they wanted to do, and the ordinary American people were never going to find out about it. Of course, time makes ancient truth uncouth, and Americans are now looking at that and saying that, yeah, there's been a lot of underhanded dealing. But again, this was just after the American Civil War, where Lincoln was trying to basically pull the country back together, and the Southern Democrats basically wanted to keep the newly freed slaves as somehow subordinate, and that was the reason for the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. Another part of that same amendment is one that also set the stage for the abuse of the states economically, where it says that the validity of the U.S. government debt may not be questioned. See, up until that point, if the U.S. government was spending money that the states felt was inappropriate, they could raise a stink about it. But with that 14th Amendment, yeah, that basically took off all the restrictions, and the U.S. government could borrow and spend and borrow and spend, and the states are forbidden to say anything about it.
And the Rothschilds had a big grin from ear to ear. I'll hang up unless I get talk to somebody else.
All right,
Bye.
Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That's crucial. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. How do you suppose someone is made subject to the jurisdiction thereof?
By being a citizen of this country. Yeah, that's a good interpretation.
Like when you go into the military, you got a contract, right?
Yes.
By the way, speaking of the military, and the previous caller, if he really wants to have an impact, get on to the city council meetings, county council meetings, and present the evidentiary proof, challenge these people. 1987 was the bicentennial of the constitutional ratification, right?
Yes.
September 1987. All the libraries had small handheld copies of what Witten Printers out of Phoenix produces, citizensrulebook.com.
Yep, I have one right here.
Mike, thank you. And, Citizens Rule Book, it's all about empowering the citizens grand jury endeavor. And, man, all you got to do is sign on jury duty. You don't have to expose your knowledge base. You just get on the jury and say, well, you know what? This doesn't compute to me, this so-called law. And by the way, the statutory code in all the states is really a conflict of interest, Mike, because it's Bar Esquire attorneys who author or promulgate, administer, enforce, yada, yada. And they've even copyrighted. It's a total conflict of interest. No separation of power either, because all senators are Bar Esquire attorneys. And I suspect the vast majority of the reps are also Bar Esquire. Here in Michigan, in at least 2 districts, CIA operatives are U.S. representative candidates. And then, Mike, remember what William Colby was at 75 or 76. He's testifying before Congress, says, yeah, man, we got high-level CIA operatives in the highest echelons of media and academe. We control it all. So as I view what's going down with Xi Jinping and the Chi-Coms et al., there's a site called military.com, and it's 24 December of 2013, 24 December 2013, military.com. Israel passes U.S. military high-tech to China.
Yes.
And in the documentary called Tricoms Have Taken Over America, this is, Brendan O'Connell thinks very highly of you, man, okay? He's just wondering why you're never talking about Telpiop, man. The Telpiop program, dude, is how APAC, man, it's APAC. There's even on YouTube, APAC, what treason looks like. And with this Ellen Sabrowski, Israel did 9/11, all the proof. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so you got these different lobbying groups who are orchestrating, conducting the hijacking, the confiscation of all of our high-tech industry technology jobs over to Israel, and then they sell it off to China and Russia, yada yada. And what do we hear from Trump? They're our enemies, right?
Yes.
We got to be. Who was it? Bannon and now Matt. Oh, we got to be ready to fight a war on several fronts. Really? Well, who's creating the enemies of us? The real enemy within and without is Israel, man, the government of Israel. And anybody who supports, as I say, Israel, man, like the goofy Christians United for Israel, groupie, baboony brain buffoons, man.
Okay, well, let's not get personal here. But getting on back to what you said, it's been a problem for many, many years that, yes, the U.S. will transfer weapons technology to Israel. Israel has been caught many times turning around and reselling it to countries who are not always our friends. And maybe that's the reason why Russia and China don't need to spend as much on their weapons development program as the United States, because the United States is spending all the money to invent this technology, and all Russia and China do is buy a copy of it from Israel. And it is a major problem. And yes, it results with the fact that, you know, we are going up against military peers who have got significant, they've closed the technology gap with the United States.
Yeah, man. And what about all the funding? We got to shut it down. Everybody in this audience needs to start hammering away, man, with at least
they don't need the money
on a weekly basis.
They don't need the money. They've got a very powerful economy. Plus, of course, it is illegal for the United States to be sending any money to Israel under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act or the Glenn Act, which specifically says the United States may not send any aid to any country in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections. Now, everybody knows Israel has nuclear weapons. Mordecai Benunu blew the lid off that quite some time ago. Netanyahu is starting to drop hints that Israel has nuclear weapons at that speech he did at Dimona. Every single penny of your money that is taken by the U.S. government and sent to Israel is a criminal act under United States law.
And you know what, Mike? I really believe that Michael Collins Piper final judgment regarding the fact that the week after Dallas, JFK had an entourage directed to Israel to inspect Dimona, and if they discovered they were engaged in nuclear weapons R&D, they're going to shut that whole program down. Well, Ben-Gurion resigned, and JFK had his brains blown out, right? And Collins Piper was told by Israeli arms dealers that, yeah, it was the Mossad that did it because JFK was going to shut off the nuclear weapons program, and they considered that a death blow to the future stability of Israel.
Well, there were multiple players. There were multiple players in the JFK assassination, and Israel was one of them. Along with organized crime in the United States, the Texas oil billionaires, and even the Federal Reserve. They all had reasons for to get rid of Kennedy, and by sort of spreading out the assassination amongst themselves, they created plausible deniability. The reality
Mike,
is that there's never a single cause behind a war or assassination. Real quick, you've only got 15 seconds.
Okay. Colonel Dan Marvin, expendable elite. He was at a special warfare school at Fort Bragg the day after the Dallas murder. He overheard CIA instructors saying things went really well in Dallas yesterday, didn't they?
Well, the CIA didn't like Kennedy either because he basically pulled the plug on the Bay of Pigs. All right, well, listen, Fred, got to let you go. Got 2 more callers waiting on the line. I'm going to try and get to you both during the last segment of our show. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. We have 2 callers waiting on the line, and I'm going to try and get to them both. Jim in Harbor Springs, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how you doing, Mike? Good to talk to you, my friend. I guess I would like to say that I think our problem is that we're approaching this immigration thing maybe in the wrong way. No matter what we do, we always get beat up. So stop and think about immigrants coming from the Middle East, okay? Now, because they are not U.S. citizens, why don't we apply the same immigration laws that their country has, okay? For instance, if I was a Christian going over to a Muslim country and I bought a Bible in there, what would be the repercussions on me bringing a Bible in? I think it'd be pretty bad, right?
It would be pretty bad here. I mean, the majority of our illegal immigration problem comes from the Mexico border, and, we should have the same immigration laws as Mexico does. You can't just step over the border and get free stuff. You step over the border without the permission of the Mexican government, you are going to jail.
We have this as far as cheap labor, and I'm thinking, oh my God, we have an answer here. If we just adopt the Mexican laws, because I know, not with the, caravan coming in, the Mexican government just let them came in is helping them actually. But if we were to adopt the laws of an immigrant coming from Guatemala going into Mexico without a visa or something, they'd be in prison. So I think to cover ourselves, if our president said, well, you know what, we're adopting the same laws that Mexican uses because they do have a wall on their southern border, So I'm saying if we just adopt the same laws as Mexico has, how can they criticize that? And then also, you want cheap labor, anybody coming in illegally, well, put them in prison, but not just to watch TV and have free meals and stuff like that, but put them on the not the chain gang, but start rebuilding our infrastructure to use that cheap Mexican labor and illegal immigrants to rebuild our country. And I'll tell you what, if they have to work for free, just for room and board, they aren't going to come here. They aren't really. So,
the thing is here, we actually already have immigration laws. It's called Title VIII. They're simply not being enforced. Yes, the Democratic Party has gone outlaw. Anyway, Jim, I'm going to let you go and try and fit in one more caller. Mark in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, some of the time I'd like to talk about the illegitimacy of the so-called 14th Amendment, but right now Gap.com needs a bit more attention. They've been deplatformed with the utter duplicity that the synagogue shooter said things on Gab, and Twitter and Facebook. You don't see anybody criticizing Twitter or Facebook for allowing somebody to rant in a so-called anti-Semitic way. Sounds like you got to go, but you've heard of this, right?
Yeah, well, we talked about Gab, and we've hopefully they're going to be back up by the end of the week. Anyway, listen, we are out of time. There's the music. Mark, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. We all need to reach out to our conservative friends and make sure they are going to vote next week. This is the most important midterm election probably in all of U.S. history, and immigration is once again the central issue. And so please share all that stuff with your friends. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.